Hello, friends. I am excited to have my friend Gloria Chou here on the podcast today. This is long overdue. Gloria and I have been friends for, I think, close to 2 years now. And I actually got the chance to hang out with her when I was in New York City last summer. She hosted us at her apartment afterward, and we had a dinner together. And it was just an amazing time. She is truly one of the most genuine human beings you will ever get the chance to meet. So, Gloria, I love you. Thank you for coming on the show today. And I'm really excited to jump into your case study.
Love you right back.
All right, Gloria, I know you have a Cubicle to CEO story that's not necessarily super traditional, but I still want to hear it. Like our
Mm.
listeners, tell us how you made that jump from employee to entrepreneur.
Well, I was the employee of employees. I was actually in the government. So I was locked in for 25-year career with a pension. So I used to be a US diplomat with a security clearance, and I was looking at a very comfortable career. Got to go through the diplomatic line, have diplomatic community, all of the things, right? And I was just deeply miserable because it was very much military-esque hierarchy, and it works for some people. It didn't work for me. And I felt so stuck, even though on the outside I had a picture perfect life, right? I got to travel, I got to work abroad. And I basically, after my first tour abroad, I was looking at 3 more years of doing the same thing in a different country. And I just couldn't do it anymore. I probably applied to over 1,000 jobs to try to leave while, having a job. But I just couldn't. I actually wanted to work in PR because I love seeing people win. I knew I was a great communicator, but I probably had over 1,000 applications. I had people putting in like references for me, and they all wanted very cookie cutter PR agency experience, which I never had. And to this day, I've never worked at an agency. So basically, I had to move home, kill my ego, got back on unemployment, and started to rebuild my life from there. And I started my PR literally. I'm like, can you Googling? There's like a siren going on. What's up, Brooklyn? Welcome to Brooklyn. Literally Googling the newsroom of New York Times operator and then dialing zero and then convincing that person to pass me on to the next person and just cold calling because I had no context in the media. I never studied media. And I think from cold calling thousands of times, getting rejected, phone slammed in my face, that's how I came up with my CPR pitching method that I now teach to entrepreneurs. So that's my story.
I am obsessed with your story for so many reasons. One being that I think you and I are maybe in the small percentage of people who actually enjoy talking on the phone. I think a lot of people like hate phone calls for a myriad of reasons, obviously. But I don't know, there's something very comforting to me about just being able to discuss in real time with someone, collaborate with someone in real time in a way that doesn't feel as energetically present as sometimes being on video because you're active listening, your whole body is participating in the conversation, whereas I feel like phone calls are just very kind of you can be walking about doing your thing and still in conversation with someone. So I love that you cold called, you actually kind of just worked your way through all of the gatekeepers that you needed to get to the source or the journalist or the editor or whoever, and that you're so self-taught in this area. I bet that actually plays to your advantage sometimes, not having a formal background in PR, because you're not so boxed in by the limitations of what like textbook PR is. So if you're a founder, especially if you're a woman-owned business or a woman of color, Gloria's approach to PR, I think, is just so simple yet so revolutionary, and highly recommend you spend some time Googling Gloria Chou or Small Biz PR podcast if you want all the details on her background there. But of course, the purpose of our show is to talk about stuff that you can't Google. So that leads us to your case study today, Gloria, which is all about comparing the launches between your February 2022 and your October 2022 launch for PR Starter Pack, which is your signature program, and how in the most recent one, you actually intentionally rejected a bunch of traditional marketing or bro marketing tactics that led you to your best launch ever in an economic downturn. So let's just start by setting the stage. What were your revenue numbers from February 2022, that launch, compared to the October one?
So I wanted my first six-figure launch, so I was able to accomplish that in February. So we did a little bit over maybe 105,000. We got a lot more refunds than we did in the latest one. So fast forward October 2022, we did 125,000.
Amazing.
and way less refunds. And we pretty much spent the same amount of money in ads. So we were able to get so much more ROI because we were able to dial in on our messaging.
Mm. And I do want to actually circle back later to this data point around refund rates because this is something that I love you're so transparent on because a lot of people don't. I mean, they kind of like to keep that hush hush, right? Like they have a refund, they're like, "Oh, let's not tell anyone." You're very straightforward about it, and I think your self-awareness around even tracking this metric and looking for ways to improve is something that's worth hearing. So I'll circle back to that. But let's first start with like the list of essentially bro marketing tactics that you chucked out the window. So, first thing that you did was you revealed your price at the beginning. So, tell me about that decision. Why choose to state the price right from the get go?
Traditionally, we're told by marketers you need to kind of get them to stay until the end, give them a chance to win an iPad, and kind of almost trick them into making a decision. And I think because of the inundation of people being like, I don't want another course, like, we're just so over it. I'm not sure that works anymore,
Mhm.
right? So, in taking apart my messaging and going from February's launch to all of the work that I did around my own scarcity mindset, healing my own scarcity trauma, and the work that I did around, how I can support women of color, that journey led me to basically see the ways where I just brainwashed into the status quo, where it's like, well, everyone does this. So I had to do that. And that was one of the first things that I did because my ethical copywriter, Brittany McBean, she actually was the one that told me this idea. And she's like, more and more people are doing this. I don't think it's really common, but I think if you do reveal it at the beginning, it's going to be really powerful. And yeah, people are going to leave and they're going to leave the room, whatever. And that's fine. You have to lean into the space where you're not trying to attract every person. You only want the hell yes people. And when she said that, I think it's something clicked in my mind because I think before, as course creators, we just want everyone to love us. Everyone can join, right? But that's actually not the key to success. I found that the more polarizing, I'm not saying that you should offend people, but the more polarizing you are in taking a stand, actually people lean way in. Yeah, you're going to have people who are going to eject themselves out of the room, but that's fine. So when I did that and I revealed it, I saw the live chat going off and people were like, wow, this is amazing. Or some people were like, this just not for me right now. Bye. Or, people left and that's fine. But I saw that overall, when I did that, most people stayed on until the end, even without all these gimmicks about staying on until the end, win an iPad, things like that. They actually naturally stayed on until the end. It kind of almost took the pressure off because I literally say, here's something that I'm going to do. I know some of you might leave, but here is what I will show you at the end, right? It's going to lead to the next step. And no matter if you join or not, I will still give the value that I promised when you signed up for the webinar, which is to teach my CPR method. So most people did actually stay on to the end.
I think that is so powerful because to your point, I think some of those gimmicks that are often used in marketing can almost be a little bit infantilizing, right? It's like you're telling someone, I don't trust you enough as an adult human being to be able to make a decision for yourself on what's right for your business or an investment that you think is worthwhile or valuable. But instead, when you pre-frame from the very beginning, like, hey, this is exactly what you can expect today when you spend your time with me, and this is what it's going to lead to. And no, you do not have to join my program, but I'm telling you that's where this conversation will go. But either way, you're leaving the room with the value that you came for in terms of, the promise of the free class. I just think that's so empowering. I think that if someone shared that with me, I would feel even better about how I'm choosing to spend my time in that class. So I love that you had such great feedback. And to your point, that the people who were obviously not going to be the hell yes people just left and filtered themselves out. The second thing that I really thought was interesting that you did is around removing the value stack, which if you're listening to this, and I'm sure you've all been on a webinar and know what this is, but in case you don't, value stack is typically at the end of the webinar when someone's pitching their offer, they are showing like almost an itemized list of all of the different features or benefits that you're going to receive by purchasing. They assign a value to each of those things, total the sum up, and then they usually slash the price into something significantly less so it feels like a really great deal. Now, I'm going to insert my opinion here and say I don't necessarily think that value stacks are inherently wrong, but I do think Gloria has a really great reason for why she felt like this wasn't necessary for her class. So, Gloria, I would love to hear your take on this.
Well, I think traditionally from the funnel bros, right? The ones that kind of paved the way for the industry, in the beginning when we're creating courses, we just did what they did, right? Because they were the ones that were doing it the most. So we are like, okay, this is what it is. Again, it's all about decolonizing your mind. And so as I was doing the work and figuring out what is really true for me and what is just me being imprinted by someone else, I looked at the way that I gave into that by stacking all the value. And I felt like it didn't really convince people, because if it did, then obviously when I took it off, the sales would be less, right? So even
Mhm,
though I did value stack in our earlier launch and our later launch, I decided to take away all those numbers. And people really loved it, because I actually talked to someone else and they said, oh, like they're rolling their eyes. They're like, I hate it when people say you can get all this for $9,999 today for $50. Like what you said, it's almost tricking someone and it's a little insulting, I
mhm,
think. And it almost sounds like an infomercial. So I
mm,
decided to not do that. So I took away the entire column. And I could have said, because we do have a PR database, which now is built on Airtable, got 80,000 contacts. I could say something like, normally softwares like this would be X, Y, and Z, right?
mhm.
But I think there's a difference between like saying that and being like 10,000, 10,000, 10,000. So for me, it's more of an anecdotal like evidence of this is how much it would actually cost, and not saying this module here is 500, because no one knows what the value of each module is, right? Like there's no real like barometer for that. So yeah, I took all of that away and I just revealed the final price.
I totally see your point there, distinguishing between inflating prices artificially so that you can have like a nice even number to come down to. What I mean by that is, often in bro marketing, it's like, okay, if you want to sell your course for $1,000 and you want your value stack to be worth 10,000, so you can say, oh, look, it's basically like 90% off, right? And assigning random values to, like you said, modules or the value of the Facebook group or whatever, when it's not really rooted in any sort of like evidence based context versus, like you said, it does sometimes make sense to actually share, oh, this type of access to information or this level of support is actually X amount of dollars in the marketplace.
Yeah.
But you're going to get a better value here today. The latter feels more educational to me,
Hmm.
whereas the former feels like, to your point, it just feels like people can't see it through what that is. So I really
Exactly.
like the way you distinguish that.
Yeah, another thing I'll add is when you do put those inflated numbers or you assign an arbitrary number, you're basically making the assumption that your audience only cares about saving money and that they only care about buying what's cheap. And that's absolutely not true. Sure, of course, like, as a child of immigrants, like Ellen, I'm sure you know, like
Yeah.
pinching pennies was how we were raised. But that's not the type of audience I'm trying to attract, because I realize in order for you to advocate for yourself and literally rewrite the narrative of what an entrepreneur looks like through doing the sacred work of pitching, it takes more than just pinching pennies, right? So, from a mindset shift, if you think about the law of energy, you are what you seek. If I just did all the value stack and I was like 90% off, I will only attract people who bought it because they're getting a deal. But
Mm,
then maybe the program is not for them because they're not looking for a transformation. So I
mm,
do agree. Instead of putting the value of a Facebook group, I would put what the value is. The value is that they're validated, that they're not alone in the scary journey, that someone can affirm them. To me, it's like that's a better way to sell it, is here's what it is and here's what you get. Not here's what it is and it's 90% off.
Oh, that's so, so good. Okay. This is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but since you brought this up, I can really relate, like you said, because we're both Chinese. We're both first gen in terms of living in America. And I totally relate to this, I guess, this culture of if you can save the most amount of money, that is a win or a success, right? And I actually saw a YouTube video recently that really blew open my mind on this discussion between what is the difference between being cheap and being frugal? And the way this person worded it was so just like groundbreaking to me. I know it's not a new concept, but the way they said it made sense to me, where they said people who are cheap only will buy things if it's the least amount of money. So, to your point, they want to get the best possible deal versus people who are frugal. It's not that they're not willing to spend money, but they're only going to spend money intentionally if they believe the value is there. So they will pay whatever is right for the best value. And that isn't always the cheapest option, but they're going to be intentional with how they spend their money. And that just resonated so much with me. And what you said just now about not setting yourself up to attract people who only care about getting the cheapest deal. Oh my God, that was so good. Like that, I'm like, okay, we can just end this conversation. Like you already shared great value just through that one piece.
And the data proves it because I know we're going to jump to this, but it's refund rates, right? If you're doing the scarcity thing, 2 hours left, 1 hour's left. And look, there's nothing wrong with offering a discount. I offer a 5-day window. So it's not that there's no urgency, but if the whole thing is about provoking a nervous system response, not from an
Mm.
empowered place, but like FOMO place, right? A place of lack, you're going to get more refunds because it's a decision that's not full of intent and empowerment. And so that was another shift I made was, do I want to trick someone into a nervous system response where they're FOMOing, or is it they're so ready? Because the people who are ready and they see the value, not just trying to get 90% off, they will go in the program. They will live and breathe the values. They will show up for you and they will get the transformation. And why are we even doing this if we're trying to sell courses to people and they're not even opening it, right? Like you hear about the statistic, people who get courses, like 90% of them don't even open it. My job is I don't want anyone in my course that's not going to experience transformation. That's not going to reflect well on me.
100%. And I actually experienced something similar in the final launch of my mentorship program last summer in August when we closed the doors to my 12-month group mentorship program. We were so specific about calling out who we wanted in this program, exactly what the value is, exactly what the transformation would be, and what we expected of them as students, as much as what they should expect of us as the coach or the educator or whatever we're delivering to them. And it was astounding, Gloria, just to visibly experience over the last however many months it's been since August, the quality of questions, the level of show up rates on our calls, the type of wins that these last cohort of students are getting is so different because they were bought into the transformation from the get go. They were not bought into, oh, can this be like a last ditch effort or like a, to your point, a FOMO, push to join. So, so good. Yes, I'm saying yes to everything.
And you know what, Ellen? It's a very complex and emotion filled process for all of us because, on one hand, I just said what I said. But on the other hand, I understand that people need a little bit of a push. So I
Mhm.
struggle with that every day, honestly, where it's like I'm not the pillar of ethical business, right? I have a long ways to go. Like, for example, one of the things is a lot of people who are in the ethical marketing industry, they do not offer a payment plan that is a higher total price,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
I know we have had a discussion about this and it's very contentious. And that's something I struggle with because, you can pay in full, or usually if you pay in monthly payments, there's kind of an upcharge for that. So right now I do have that, but that is something that I struggle with and I wrestle with every day. So I kind of do see both sides.
Yeah, I get what you're saying because there's a reason that certain marketing tactics have always worked, right? Because it plays into the way that humans behave. And like you just said, there are times and situations where adding in a layer of urgency actually does benefit someone because nobody is helped when they're stuck in indecision, right? Like people who are just forever stuck in this no man's land of I don't know, like they don't choose either way, yes or no. They're not being helped because they're obviously making no progress when they're stuck in that position. So, helping them get off the fence and either decide yes or no, in my book, both are wins because either way that person has clarity on how they want to move forward. And so, I agree with you that there are instances where it makes sense to provide like a safe container for people to make a decision, and sometimes you have to layer in those elements to make that possible. And it's not about being a perfect business, right? I think that's another like level of pressure that we put on ourselves. It's not about being like this shining moral example. I think it's about being conscious of how our decisions impact the people that we're trying to serve, and doing our best to create an empowered decision, like you said, rather
Yeah.
than a lack decision.
And if I may, in terms of the energy of lack, because all about energies. You know when you like try to close a cart and you get on like those 15-minute calls with people, like try to convince them. So I
Mhm.
did that previously, not for the February launch, but previously. And what I found was when I was in that mode of like trying to get them to convert, like showing them everything's in the portal and just doing a demo, that energy of like urgency never really converted well. Right,
Mhm.
because it wasn't about me listening to them and like, "What can I help you do?" Right? It was more like, "Here's a program, I can't wait for you to join." And I noticed that when I do get it, because we all do, right? Like scarcity has been ingrained in my bones. It's not like I'm gonna wake up and completely get rid of it. I do see it creeping up where it almost feels like a tightness in my chest where it's like, "Okay, we gotta hit our numbers, we gotta go." And whatever you're doing from that energy, I don't feel like it ever works. And when I actually like step away a little bit from my computer, like I did in the October launch, like literally between the two live webinars, we had like 1,000 people between the two. I literally closed my laptop and I told my team, I'm like, you know what? Whatever happens, I feel like we're all winners. I value you. And I went out for a walk. Whereas in February, I was such a dictator. I was very adamant. I was like, we need to like do more testimonials. Like we need to come up, like hit our numbers. And it was almost just like I was like driving this like big machine. And no one wants to work with someone like that. So through my own journey of seeing the places where I really gave into scarcity and was not the best leader that I could be, I see what's on the other side of that. And that is just you give it your all. Maybe it's time to take a break and just trust in the universe instead of trying with 20, 30 different solutions just to make it work and fit everything in.
I really appreciate your honesty, and as I'm sitting here just listening, you know, I know you personally, but I know many of our listeners who are tuning in today, this may be the first time they're meeting you, and the fact that you are sharing with such open, I don't wanna say it's not criticism at all, self-evaluation, like, the fact that you're so willing to say, like, "This is where I really fell short," or, "This is what was really driving my motivations or desire," like, that to me is just so powerful because I know you're not the only one who has felt that way. I know I felt that way, you know, I know many people listening have probably felt that way, and so, already I just, you know, again, wanna iterate how thankful I am for your honesty. That's one of my favorite things about you.
Thank you. Yeah, we can go down the honesty rabbit hole. Maybe it gets too real, but that's for another episode, I think.
For the after show, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
So come back and listen to our after show. It's always the last Tuesday of each month on Instagram at Cubicle to CEO, and we bring back all of our podcast guests. So, anyways, the next thing that you did, or rather didn't do, is previously PR Starter Pack. I actually remember this because I bought PR Starter Pack. I don't remember when. I think it was in 2020. And at the time, it was a truly DIY course, right? There was really no regular coaching calls or anything like that. So this time around, in your most recent launch, you chose to add a lot of support, including monthly calls, without increasing the price. So tell us about this decision.
Oof. So I think in online business, you hear a lot leverage your time, try to get the most, try to like not get on any calls. These people don't deserve your time. And so, even though I think boundaries are important, we have to remember why we started this business. We started a business not to make a machine that spits out money. We started this business to really make an impact in people's lives. And somehow, in my journey of scaling my business, maybe a little bit too quickly, I bought into this internalized capitalism, which is like more is always better, more at all costs. And I don't know if your listeners know this, but basically that launch in February, where I had like a lot of refund requests and I still wasn't doing like a lot of the more ethical tactics, I suffered a complete mental breakdown because I had a huge open abdominal surgery where they took out an 11 centimeter fibroid in my uterus just 3.5 weeks before the launch. So the fact that I made myself work with staples, like it's just I look at that and I want to cry for that person who thought that on day 3 of basically having a C-section that I got back on the computer because my goal was six-figure launch, six-figure launch. And guess what? I did it and it felt freaking awful. I was such a terrible person to my team. I was so worried about the people who wanted refunds. Instead of celebrating our success, I was like, what happened here? And I just spiraled into this ball of negative energy because I wasn't aligned. I wasn't right. I was just chasing that number with
Mhm.
those zeros. So I think after doing this like shiny object, like, oh, six-figure launch, I did it. I was like, something has to change because I'm reaching all my goals, but I'm more unhappy than ever. And so I spent a lot of work, like hiring coaches, like therapists, like all the things to figure out why is it that the more money I made, the less happy I became. And the reason was because I was just chasing a number and I got further and further from my why, which is to make women of color and BIPOC founders feel seen. So I made a conscious decision on this launch to add monthly workshop style training calls. Last time I did this call, Ellen, it was a 60-minute call. I stayed on for 3 hours.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, and I'm not surprised because I've been on one of those calls before, and your students, they show up. I mean, they really have such great questions. I always kind of, walk into any sort of Q&A style or workshop style environment and assess the caliber of the conversationing happening, and I feel like people who ask really high quality questions, I'm always so impressed by those people because it tells me how they think, like the way
Mhm.
their brains think. And so I love that you're getting so hands-on with your students. I guess a follow-up question to that is, now that you're implementing these monthly calls and some of them are perhaps extending for longer than you had planned, is there any part of this that feels unsustainable to you at the level of support you're providing without, let's say, increasing the investment? Is the current capacity doable for you?
I think that's really a good question. And that leads me back to what I was trying to say, which is there's always this thing like, oh, there's boundaries and then there's like giving. And I think that in business, for some reason, we're taught that those are at odds. Like somehow you cannot serve people for free and have a sustainable business. And I think I read somewhere at Simone Gray Soul, who's like my hero. She's like, being a good marketer is literally helping as many people as you can for free and being so good at that that people want to buy your stuff. And when I read that, I was like, "What? What is she talking about?" And then I dove in more, and she has this wildly successful business, and she doesn't, do any kind of like discounts or promos. And I started to think about how I could apply that to my business, and I started thinking, what are some of the things that make me feel like a chest tightness, like getting on those calls, like trying to convince people, which is an energy of seeking and chasing, versus like when I'm on those calls, time just flies, and I just love being on those calls. And so for now it feels like it gives me energy, and so it doesn't drain me, and I'm going to keep doing that. And I actually also started to do free in-person events whenever I'm in a city just to meet my members. And I always get catering from women of color bakers and winemakers, and they love it. I mean, sure, I could probably charge for it because I have a budget. I'm probably paying like no less than $1,000 each time I do this, but it just makes me feel so happy. And I think after my really terrible like surgery and then the burnout, that was one of the things I wanted to do to get back to my why, and making
Mhm.
sure that those women felt seen and connected, even if there's no like monetary return, like the cosmic universe, like the energy, I know it's going to come back to me in one way or another.
Yeah, I'm so encouraged honestly by everything you're sharing. And this kind of leads right into one of the hot takes I wanted to hear your opinion on, which is, you said people don't want more content. They want community and connection. And you just referenced that you are doing these in-person meetups in cities from time to time. And obviously that's an amazing way to foster community and connection. What are some other ways that you see are working really well to add in those elements of community and connection through the experience that you're creating for your students?
Yeah, I mean, I think the business model of like courses, it's dying out. I think there was a gold rush and now people are over it. So I actually literally wrote an email to my subscribers. I was like, throw your course in the trash. Because I get so offended when people are like, oh, not offended, but when they call my program a course, or they are already skeptical because they've been burned, right? Like raise your hand if you've bought a course that you've never opened. Like I still have one that I haven't opened. I bought 2 years ago. And it's not the person's fault. It's just, this is just, we're saturated with content. People don't want another course. They don't want more content. We have so much content. What gets people staying is people want to feel seen. They just want to know that they're not alone in this journey, right? That you can affirm their struggles or their viewpoints, or maybe connect them with someone else on the call. So what I do now, and what I've always loved to do, because I just love to connect people, and that's why you and I really see our kindred spirits, because you're the same way. But when I'm on the call, I'll be like chatting with them, like, oh, you should meet this person. She also makes a hair product. Or you should
Mhm.
meet her. She's also in Atlanta. So even though I don't have like a formal, like every city Facebook group, I'm constantly trying to connect them, which goes to my second point of scarcity. Is a lot of people say, well, if you make everyone connect and they're just going to leave you, they're going to leave the group, right? They don't need you anymore. I actually don't find that to be true. I actually find that the more you connect people and make them feel seen, the more they have something to rally around, a common value, which is being a member of your community.
Oh, yeah, that's so good. I have experienced this personally. In a few weeks, I'm interviewing two members of my coaching program that I retired, Mindy and Juliet, who you guys will get to meet, Mindy and Jules. And they are incredible women who met through the program and through their friendship, through their connection to each other. They actually both reached their first $10,000 month, which was, the transformation that they had joined the program intending to want to get to. And that's the tip of the iceberg. It's really about all the other amazing collaborations that they've done in pursuit of growing their businesses. And I couldn't agree more that there's so much value when you are the common denominator between connecting people. It's such a value that people don't really think of as value in the traditional form of, oh, let me give you like an exchange of information. But I think it's actually one of the best ways you can create value, especially, and this is kind of a tangent, but oftentimes when people are brand new to entrepreneurship and they're asking, how can I create value if, I don't have a whole lot to offer at the beginning? And I tell them, look, if you can focus on finding one person in your network that you can connect to someone else that you meet. Just that one action alone can create undeniable value in ways that you have no idea how that will play out in years to come. And so I'm so glad you brought that piece up. I did also want to add one more kind of thought to piggyback off what you said, like your eval, throw your course in the trash. Of course, as someone who helps people create online courses, I do have a slightly differing opinion on the value of courses. But to your point, there is a difference between a DIY course and an actual mentorship program or a coaching program or an experience of some sort. And I think where people get burned by courses is when people try to present it as one thing when it's actually something completely different. And so I think you have to be very intentional about how you are positioning what you're actually creating for someone. Is this truly meant to be a self digested, self guided tool for them to, take this knowledge, take this framework and implement and get a result? Or is this meant to be a community, a mentorship, whatever it is? And you have to be so clear about what you're actually offering. And then I also think the best courses that I've ever taken, the ones that truly actually did change my life, were the ones that didn't try to be everything to everyone, right? They didn't try to be like, oh, this is your all in one marketing course for everything you could possibly ever know about marketing your business. Instead, it was like, here's one very specific skill set or one very specific result that I'm going to teach you. And I'm going to actually use my course framework as a filter for all of the competing information out there and try to get you on the most efficient path from point A to point B. And those type of courses are the ones that I think actually create transformation in people. So anyways, that's just kind of my add-on thought to what you shared.
Yeah, I think specificity is so good. I mean, they say the riches are in the niches, right? So
Yeah.
people are not going to believe that one course is going to solve all of their problems. So don't be afraid to, I always say in my pitching training, is peel away the layer of an onion. I want to get to that juicy core. You don't want the whole onion because just more is better.
Mhm.
We want to have that juicy core. So that's what I do agree. If it's a very specific thing and they're not saying we give you support and then you're in a Facebook group with 10,000 people, just make sure that you're aligned in the level of support so people really feel like they're seen.
Yes, yes, totally. Delivering on what you actually say you will do. I think that is such a huge trust builder. Speaking of, again, you getting just more connected, more generous with your time with people, one of the things you did in rejection of bro marketing, this most recent launch, was you actually did get on sales calls, but not the ones that you were talking about before, where it was like the last 15 minutes before cart close and you felt this like pressure to get someone to buy, but to actually spend time with people, understanding like what they needed from you. How did that go? Walk us through your structure for how you implemented those calls. What types of conversations were you having on those calls?
I think one thing that we're afraid to do as entrepreneurs is to admit that we have something else that could be lacking and to work on. And so it took me forever, Ellen, to have like a feedback loop where if people didn't buy, it was like, why didn't you buy? Right. And like actually tell me. And that was just me closing myself off to growth, right? Because that was my ego. So after this launch that went really well, I actually got on the calls with a couple of people, just sit through kind of like, where are the gaps in the messaging, or what is going on. And these people, they were not going to buy, and it was okay because that was so much information that allowed me to understand my audience more. Because remember, the whole point is not to convert everyone. It's how can I
Mhm.
get my messaging even more dialed in so the hell no people can take 10 steps back, and I can get the hell yes people in there. So in opening myself up to feedback, both in calls, emails, surveys, after it's a gold mine of information. So I encourage everyone out there to put a feedback survey everywhere you can, in your program, in your emails, even do a contest. Just the more information you can get, the better.
That's so smart. So you had these calls with people who didn't buy to tell you why they didn't buy. And then you're also implementing, like you said, these forms and surveys to your actual students who did buy on their experience as they're going through. What are some, just kind of as like a bonus question here, what are some powerful questions that you're asking on these surveys or forms that you are seeing really insightful responses from? If people had to ask one or two key questions, what would those be?
Well, one of the things I think is really hard as entrepreneurs is when people ask for refunds, right? It's like, ouch.
Yeah.
So it hurts. Doesn't feel great, but that's actually probably the best feedback you're ever going to get.
Mm.
Because it's like, what is it about this program that you wanted to get a refund, right? We don't ever want to admit that we have refunds, but everyone gets refunds, right? And so, in order for me to understand where the gaps were, I really, really wanted to just basically get on the calls with people who asked for a refund. Some of them didn't want to get on the phone, they're just like, this is not for me. But I got so much information that allowed me to have way better process for onboarding. Because one of the things about this, Ellen, is like, we're not expert course creators. I'm not like a course creator magician with like all the nice templates. I just created this based off of what I knew. So from a UX point of view, from like a customer process point of view, I knew I was lacking, right? Like, where does the journey start? So by having them tell me like, this wasn't as clear, or, like I would have preferred onboard in this way. Now we're like redoing the entire onboarding process, where we tell them it's kind of a pick your adventure, where like they get in and they pick what industry they're in and their goals, and then we direct them to the modules, because there's so much in there, right? I mean, there's gift guides, there's podcasts, there's product guides, there's entrepreneur features. So I think having that feedback is what allowed me to completely revamp my onboarding.
That's so valuable. I totally agree with you that, in the same way that a lot of business owners may not be great salespeople, may not be great marketers to begin with, right? Because their interest or their area of expertise is in something entirely different. Same thing. I like that you pointed out that just because you're a subject matter expert, so like for you, you are obviously brilliant with public relations, that doesn't necessarily make you brilliant at user experience in courses. And so that's a really great delineation. I'm glad you pulled that piece out and how you're actively working to improve that. And I do want to shout out, by the way, for all those listening, Gloria's refund rate, she was so vulnerable and generous in sharing this information. But in the February launch, it was 10%. And in October, it dropped by nearly half because of some of those, changes that you implemented. So I just want to congratulate you, friend. Like the fact that you listened to that feedback, took it with grace, and actually implemented and are seeing real data driven points showing that you're having success with that. That's huge. That's a lesson I think we could all take a page out of your book for.
Thank you. Sometimes, you talk about like the wound, right? And you want to just keep putting a band aid on there. And
Mhm.
we don't want to talk to people who got refunds, because it's not like a happy thing. It's like, yeah, you got a refund. So a lot of times we just completely ignore that audience. We either take them off, or we just pretend like we just put them in the closet. But by literally opening up that wound and putting disinfecting on it and like asking them, some things didn't feel great, right? Because it's like this, my course is perfect. What do you mean, right now? So by doing that and subjecting myself to criticism has really, really helped me a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's so true. It's probably one of the hardest things we have to grapple with because so much of what we create feels very personal, right? It's like an
Mhm.
expression of ourselves. So it can feel very personal when someone rejects that. But I think that's the character growth that we all have to go through, like you said. The final thing I wanted to touch on that I loved that you did in this particular launch is that you sent freebies to people who didn't join. So you intentionally follow back up with these people. Tell us about that strategy. What freebies were you sending them if they didn't join? How did you initiate that conversation? Was this like a personal DM? Was this a mass email to everybody who didn't buy? Walk us through that.
Yeah. I think even taking 5 steps before that is, I think we've been taught in the online world, which is try to have like as least amount of effort for the most amount of revenue, right? And I think that works if it's like an algorithm or a machine, but especially now, people want that personal touch. So whether it's one DM voice note, 30 seconds, to be like, hey, I saw that you signed up for the webinar. Let me know if you have any questions, right? Now, I don't want you staying up until like 3 in the morning and like burning yourself out. But the more you can show them that you're a real person, just so you can just extend that hand to be like, I'm here and I see you, that the better. So obviously I could not get, on the phone with like 1,000 people registered, right?
Yeah.
But if I was on Instagram, I might see someone being like, hey, like I signed up for this class, and I'll be like, oh, cool. I saw that, you're from here. I'm from here too. Or, oh, like, I love these bags that you make. So it has to come from a place that works for you. I'm not recommending everyone get on the phone with every single person, but the more personal touch points, the better. And what we did was, even before they sign up for the webinar, in the welcome email of like, hey, you signed up for this live launch. This, by the way, this is about live launch, not the evergreen. So, hey, I saw that you signed up for my live webinar. Just to get you started, here are 3 things that I, want to show you to help you. So it might be a little template, it might be a 5-minute video or something, so that you're giving value before they even get on the masterclass. So it's almost like, that they know you in a little bit. And if you can't do that, what I did is, on like, after the webinar finished and the sales cycle ended, obviously, why didn't you buy survey, right? Getting real open and vulnerable. And for the people who did respond with certain things, I gave tailored responses. So people were like, well, I'm a nonprofit. I don't understand if this was for me. And then I would just basically be like, oh, if you're a nonprofit, you really should take this PR strategy, or like listen to this podcast episode, right? That's what I love about podcasts, because it's right there. So see what kind of freebies that you can have to give people, whether it's a podcast or a video training that you can cut into 30 seconds, that you have like in templated form that you can just send off to people. So that way it's not like, oh, you didn't buy? Okay, bye. You're dead in my book, right? It's like, yeah, exactly. Because what we also found is people actually go through like 3 months before they convert, because this is not like an easy program that's like dance on Instagram, because it's like, once you actually sign up, you're going to have to like put yourself out there, and that's scary for a lot of people. So I realize what I'm doing really is really making people feel confident to even put themselves out there. So there's a lot of mindset work that needs to be done. So people don't buy all the time on the first try, and that's fine. So when we did our data, people usually stay on my list for like 3 months before they're finally convinced. And so during that time, that is your time to be adding value. Hey, did you hear the podcast interview? Oh, by the way, I hear you're a fashion brand. Why don't you listen to this episode where I interview the fashion editor at Allure?
That's so interesting. Essentially, what you're doing is, like, let's say they don't buy, you are preparing them for the next opportunity for when it might be a yes for them by guiding them to the next step, whatever that looks like, right? Whether you're sending them to a podcast episode, whether you're giving them a template or just a quick tip. I really, really love that approach. I feel like that really just shows how much you care about each person. And to your point, if your whole mission and your whole why is helping others feel seen, what better way for someone to feel seen than for you to follow up in that way and give them that next step to encourage them in that path, whether they choose to work with you or not. Ultimately, this conversation has just been so refreshing for me, Gloria, but I'm sure for so many of our listeners too, just hearing you share so openly, so vulnerably about this whole process of how you've rejected these tactics that have been so ingrained into our industry. I wanted to wrap up this case study interview with a bonus. It's almost like a little mini case study, but like a bonus hot take from you, because this was something you actually shared with me in DMs that I was like, oh my God, like so hard to choose which case study we're going to talk about because they're both so good. So, this concept, speaking of doing things the non traditional way, you have this hot take that people do not need to be on social media to grow or market their businesses. And you, in fact, yourself, I think, made your first $100,000 in your business without social. And you did it through this mind blowing thing that I've never even thought about doing, which is Slack groups. So, can you quickly just debrief us on what exactly does that mean? Like, What groups did you join? What were you doing in these groups? And how did that actually result in revenue for your business?
So for my audience, mostly women and founders, there's a lot of Slack groups and communities like I Fund Women and Female Founder Collective. And they have Slack groups where there's like maybe 10, 30, 60,000, and even more if it's a startup group, right? I'm in like 10 Slack channels. And I realized that during the pandemic, it was like Clubhouse, right? But people were really active on Slack. And I got connected with I Fund Women first because I heard about their Slack channel. And then I thought, I just created my new Instagram account. I have about 300 followers. There's no way I can compete with other people, right? I'm not like great at social media. How can I give value but still get a lot of people like in my orbit? So I'm not doing like one to one, right? One to one teaching. So what I did is I actually came up with my presentation, which is my signature masterclass. I basically put it to them like this. I literally like Slack the founder. I was like, "Hey, I noticed that all of your founders in these Slack channels have been asking about PR and crowdsourcing and how they can get PR campaign going for their launch. This is what I do, and I'm happy to host a free, live training that can be recorded and for anyone to watch. So you're providing a value right away. So that's live. You have 60 people live, and then I give them a freebie in the email follow up. You're creating free content for them, and then it goes into their portal. So then anyone that accesses it, it just keeps giving you that visibility, right? Also SEO. So that's kind of how I started my business, was just doing these free workshops. Now, it's obviously a lot harder to come up with a coherent presentation, like how, the whole thing, than just posting on social media.
Mhm.
But I feel like so often people don't want to do the thing that's really going to move the needle. So they do a lot of other things. I'm like ADHD procrastinator, so I'm like vacuuming and trying to get a quick win by, cleaning my sink, right? Because it makes me feel good. So I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm stressed when I start vacuuming like 5 times a day. Just give myself a little. It's like, yeah, I did something, right? But I'm like putting off the main thing. So I understand it's like a daunting task. Like, oh, I got to create this presentation, but it doesn't have to be this like huge keynote TED talk, right? It could just be like, here's what I've learned on different slides, and then a different case study. And now with AI tools, Ellen, I mean, just have the AI tool spit out all these slides, and then use that to position your authority. And then when they invite you on their platform as a vetted coach, then you have credibility, you have the audience, and you're leveraging that community. To me, that's much better than spending my time on social media all day. And one day I might get hacked, I might get banned. I don't know. It's all in the cards, but I don't own my social media.
Yeah. I love your creativity there and how you took such an unconventional approach to starting your business, to starting that visibility. And I think it just speaks volumes. Again, it's just another testament to the power of leveraging other pre built communities outside of your own when you don't have an existing audience. And I think that's so encouraging for anyone who may be listening who also finds themselves in that boat where maybe they have a really small audience on social. Maybe it's not their favorite thing to do. And just being able to see another example of a successful founder, of a successful entrepreneur like yourself who has done it differently, I think is just going to blow open their minds for what is possible, and to encourage them to think outside the box. So, anyways,
One more thing I want to add about the social media is, look, we know that social works, right? Like Ellen, your social media is off the chain. I'm always like, how can I get my stuff to look like hers? Like your stuff is amazing, but it should not be your only thing, right? You have your long form content, your guest podcasting, your speaking. So when I'm looking at my time, right, I'm always thinking, is this a $10 an hour task that I can delegate, that like social media, which by the way is not searchable? Or am I building a $10,000 an hour assets like guest podcasting, which is SEO and back? Am I speaking on a panel, right? And you can use that then to create social media. But I'm never like creating content on social media just to create it. It's always from like a reposting of, like, for example, this episode, right? Where I'm going to get 6 or 7 pieces of content. So it's all about trying to think like, how can I leverage my time? How can I create long-term assets, and not just, okay, I'm going to turn on my camera and hope that the algorithm gods like me today.
so smart. Yes. Say it again. Well, rewind again if you're listening. Gloria, thank you so much. Where can our listeners connect with you further? And we'll also link the masterclass, by the way, that Gloria has been referencing in this episode in the show notes for you today. So if you want to go click over and watch and learn how you can pitch yourself and get media coverage, we'll make sure to include that. But where else, Gloria, can people connect with you?
So I am on Instagram. I don't have a ton of following, but it's definitely better than before. I'm learning at Gloria Chou PR, Chou. And then also I have my own podcast called Small Business PR. Ellen has been on it. She has a fantastic, fantastic episode on how to pitch for a podcast. And you just hear it from the queen herself. So Small Business PR. And I'm on Instagram, which I already said. And yeah, and actually, if you DM me the word pitch on Instagram, I will give you a little freebie. How about that?
Ooh, very generous. Okay. Thanks, friend. Yes. So you heard it here. DM Gloria the word pitch to get your freebie. And thank you so much again for your time today.
Thank you.